Joining me now to discuss the rest of the day's news is Herald Sun business commentator Terry McCrann. Terry, welcome. There were some lively scenes in the Senate hearing into Qantas today with Chairman Richard Goyder hauled over the coals, and we heard from a pretty unimpressed Qatar Airways, it has to be said, who believe they've been unfairly treated. The scenes were quite extraordinary. It got testy at times. Has the economic benefit of Qatar been underestimated to the advantage of Qantas?
I think undoubtedly, Caleb, clearly the decision on Qatar, you can't blame Qantas for that. You can't blame Qantas for probably lobbying for that decision to be made. Yeah. It was a decision made entirely by the Albanese government for their own purposes, their own objectives, whatever they are. It's almost impossible to know what they are because Catherine King, I think, has given somewhere approaching 10 different versions of the reasons for the decision. In the case of Qantas, obviously, they want to have as little competition, like anybody in this world, as they can get. I think that it's to some extent, though, overblown, Caleb. I think we are getting back to a new normal after COVID. It's taken some time, and that reality is going to play out when we get into 2024. There will be a lot more seats available across the spectrum when we get into 2024.
Well, let's take a look at a little bit of what went on today. Here's Richard Goyder, the chairman, of course, of Qantas, being hauled over the coals.
All the courts that looked at this said, though, that Qantas had sound commercial reasons for making the judgment. We could not satisfy the reverse onus of proof as to
Mr.
why
Goyder, Mr. Goyder, you are avoiding the answer about this was an illegal practice, and you have the hide to say that you apologise for nothing because you made an illegal practice. When a company turns around and carries out an illegal practice, they need to be held to account. Now, that court decision has held you to account, but you refuse to hold yourself to account or the board.
So, as I said, Senator, we deeply regret the circumstances. We're now in a process...
Well, that you got caught.
We're now in a process with the courts to have appropriate outcomes for those affected employees. And, as I said, we apologise for what happened.
And everyone there's copping a spray, except, of course, for the former boss, Alan Joyce, who's overseas. We'll see how that all develops soon. Now, you've written a piece for The Australian saying that the government's new employment white paper is a paper in contradictions, with the Treasurer pledging to boost the economy at the same time as the Employment Minister's new industrial relations reforms, of course, are threatening to derail it. How's it all meant to work?
Well, exactly, Caleb. I mean, the aims of the employment paper are admirable. We'd all sign up for them. The problem, which is to make for a more productive workforce, to create greater opportunities, create higher paying jobs, to make a more productive Australia. But we've got Tony Burke as the IR Minister running off on a frolic of his own, promoting unsustainable wage increases and imposing all sorts of burdens on business right now, which ultimately override and will defeat all those aims in the employment white paper. The government really needs to know what it wants to do. Does it want to achieve a more prosperous, more successful Australia with greater job opportunities and better paid job opportunities? Or does it want to impose ridiculous burdens on business? And it really needs coordination at the top, and that coordination has to come from both the Treasurer and the Prime Minister.
And of course, at the same time, we're told that unemployment needs to rise slightly to help combat inflation. Speaking of which, the monthly inflation lifted on the numbers today to 5.2% last month, which is 0.3% higher than the month before, according to the ABS. And it's sort of housing, transport, food, insurance have been the most significant drivers of all of this, particularly the increase in the price of petrol. Is this something we ought to be worried about when the RBA sits down very soon to consider whether or not we have another interest rate rise?
Well, the RBA sits down very soon, Caleb. It's next Tuesday. It's Michelle Bullock's first board meeting as governor. She's obviously sat there as deputy governor through the last year and a half. But no, it's not something that's going to excessively trouble her. She won't be raising interest rates next Tuesday, or rather she won't be recommending to the board to vote to raise interest rates. So there'll be no rate rise next Tuesday. They really want to see, both her and the board more generally, want to see the much broader inflation numbers. These are on the monthly figures. The quarterly figures come out at the end of October, ahead of the Cup Day meeting. That's when the question will be posed more accurately. Exactly. But more importantly, in a way, Caleb, it's what happens in 2024 that's going to be critical. And if we start to get these big wage increases and the burdens on business which stop productivity, you could well see the Reserve Bank under Michelle Bullock going back in 2024 to rate hikes. I'm not predicting it, but it's certainly something that we're going to look very carefully as we start the new year in January, February.